Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm 47 years old, and over the last 2 years, I've lost more than 150 pounds. And today, I want to talk about something that I wish someone had talked to me about and told me decades ago. Being very overweight is not a personal failing, and there is hope. For years, I tried so hard to lose weight and kept failing and was so frustrated about it. I wondered if maybe I lacked discipline. Maybe I just wasn't trying hard enough. Or maybe my body was somehow broken. And after decades of failed diets, regaining weight, embarrassment, physical limitations, and feeling judged by the world around me, I started to feel so hopeless. But then I began learning about the biology behind obesity, especially insulin resistance and fasting. And for the first time in my life, things finally started making sense. And even more importantly, they finally started working. I grew up in the 1980s watching my mother struggle desperately to keep her children from becoming overweight because she didn't want us to suffer the way that she had. You see, at her heaviest, my mother weighed around 400 pounds. And I watched her work incredibly hard. She carefully prepared low fat, low calorie meals for our family. She followed the dietary advice that was considered healthy at the time. She truly believed she was doing the right thing. But because it wasn't working, society often treated her as though she must be lazy or irresponsible. And when I started gaining more weight too, beginning at around age 12, there was this assumption that she must be overfeeding me or that nobody in our household cared about health. But that wasn't true. I saw how hard she tried every single day. The problem wasn't that she didn't care. The problem was that she was following advice that unfortunately just didn't work for many people. Meanwhile, my father also became increasingly worried about my weight too. So he encouraged me to eat breakfast every morning and to snack frequently throughout the day because that was the mainstream advice at that time. People believed eating often would boost metabolism and prevent overeating. The strange thing was, I often wasn't even hungry when I was being told to eat, but people believed this was healthy. And as I became a teenager, it also became harder and harder for my parents to control my access to ultra processed food. Junk food was everywhere: school vending machines, convenience stores, friends' houses, fast food restaurants, social events. Looking back, I can now see that my parents were fighting an uphill battle against genetics, rapidly changing food environments, and dietary advice that simply wasn't helping many people stay healthy. For a long time, many people believed obesity was mostly about personal responsibility and willpower. But science has increasingly shown that biology matters a great deal. In 1986, the New England Journal of Medicine published what's often called the Stunkard study or the Danish adoption study. Researchers found that adopted children's body weights were strongly associated with their biological parents, not their adoptive parents. In some cases, even very thin adoptive families raised children who still grew up to become obese adults. Studies like this strongly suggest that genetics play a major role in body weight. Now, genetics are not destiny, But genetics absolutely can influence how vulnerable someone is to weight gain in a modern food environment. Some people can eat highly processed foods regularly and remain relatively thin, or at least not get extremely heavy. Others gain weight rapidly under the same conditions. And understanding that helped me feel less shame because it validated that this was not simply about being weak or lazy. Understanding the biology behind obesity didn't make me feel powerless. It made me feel empowered and hopeful because for the first time, I finally understood what I was actually fighting. At the same time, our food environment has changed dramatically over the years. Beginning in the late 1970s and continuing through the 80s and 90s, Americans were heavily encouraged to avoid dietary fat. People were told to eat more grains, cereals, pasta, rice, and low fat packaged foods. My family certainly did. Food companies removed fat from foods, but often replaced it with sugar and other refined carbohydrates to make those foods taste better. Ironically, many of these foods were sold as healthy or diet friendly. And at the same time, frequent snacking also became more normalized. People were encouraged to eat many small meals throughout the day to keep the metabolism going. But for many people, especially those genetically vulnerable to obesity, this combination may have created the perfect storm. Ultra processed foods, refined carbohydrates, constant eating, rising insulin resistance, and chronic hunger. Obesity is complicated, and there isn't one single cause or one single solution that works well for everyone. But learning about insulin resistance and fasting completely changed my life. What finally helped me understand my own obesity was realizing that hormones, especially insulin, affect hunger, fat storage, and how hard it is for the body to access stored fat. Insulin is a hormone produced by the pancreas in response to eating. It's essential for life and we need it, but insulin also plays a major role in fat storage. And according to the framework that finally made sense to me, constantly elevated insulin levels can contribute to weight gain and insulin resistance over time. Foods high in refined carbohydrates and added sugars tend to spike insulin levels significantly. And frequent eating may keep insulin elevated for long periods of time. When I learned this, so many things suddenly clicked into place for me. Why was I constantly hungry on low fat, low calorie diets? Why did calorie restriction feel so miserable and unsustainable? Why did I feel trapped in a cycle of losing and regaining weight over and over again? For years, I felt physically trapped inside a body that seemed determined to fight me, no matter how hard I tried. I often felt self conscious and embarrassed in public because of my size. I remember walking into restaurants and immediately wondering whether people were looking at what I ordered or silently judging me for being there at all. Whether they actually were or not, I carried that anxiety with me for years. I remember being reluctant to go to some events with people because of fear of embarrassment if I didn't fit into seats and small spaces in front of my friends. Recently, I read comments in a subreddit about childhood obesity. Several commenters were strongly of the opinion that parents of overweight children must be child abusers when they didn't even know anything about these families. These comments received a lot of support and not that much dissent, which was deeply dismaying to me because I thought of my own parents, and it's so disheartening to think of the judgments they likely face from others. That's part of why finding an approach that actually worked and that confirmed that being fat is not a personal failing brought me such enormous relief and meant such a great deal to me. Dr. Jason Fung often describes insulin as a major fat storage hormone, and learning about insulin resistance completely changed the way I understood obesity. For me personally, the breakthrough came from not constantly trying to eat less, but from learning how to eat less often. For me, the approach that finally worked was combining fasting with modern weight loss medication. And I want to be transparent about that. The medication helped tremendously with the chronic hunger and food noise that I had struggled with and that had built up in me for years. It made fasting easier, especially in the beginning while my body was still adapting. And honestly, there's no prize for suffering unnecessarily. I think people deserve tools that help them improve their health and quality of life. Again, I'm not saying this is the only approach that works for everyone, but after struggling more than 30 years with obesity, this is the first approach that helped me lose weight consistently without feeling constantly miserable. And perhaps even more importantly, it gave me hope back. If you've ever felt judged because of your weight, if you grew up in a household where everyone blamed themselves, if you've spent years trying diet after diet and wondering why nothing seemed to work, I want you to know you are not alone. And I also want you to know that your struggle probably has far more to do with biology, hormones, food environment, and outdated advice than personal failure. Through this channel, I want to explore the science, the psychology, the emotional reality of obesity, and the practical tools that are finally helping many people reclaim their health. Next week, we're going to do a deeper dive into fasting, the tool that changed the game the most for me in losing over 150 pounds. And don't worry, we'll talk about how to approach it gradually, safely, and sustainably. Subscribe if you'd like to know more about the journey, learn more about insulin resistance and weight loss science, and hear honest conversations about what it's really like to lose a life-changing amount of weight. And as always, please remember, I'm not a doctor and nothing in this video is medical advice. Please talk with your own healthcare provider before making major dietary or medical changes, especially if you have underlying health conditions. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Did you grow up in a diet household? What advice were you given about weight loss that you now realize may not have worked so well for you? Let's clear away some shame and have a thoughtful conversation in the comments.